I totally agree with you.
It's a ship. But mind you, some people have called it a boat. It's too big to be a boat.
Oh, people call ships boats, don't they?
What we're doing anyway?
Boats or submarines?
Yeah, that is right, because submarines only have one deck, and apparently to be a ship, you need to have more than one deck. So I'm told.
No, the distinction is a ship carries boats.
But can you have a boat on a submarine?
Yeah. Well, submarine's a boat, isn't it? Undersea boat.
No, but a submarine. Why can't a submarine be a ship then?
It's not. It's an undersea boat.
But some submarines can be absolutely massive.
It doesn't make any difference, does it? No ship.
Are you trying to say there's something about size here? Size doesn't count.
It does. Ask anyone. Ask Andrea.
If
You can't be asking questions.
It says it all.
No, I'm not going to ask Andrea. That's a terrible thing to say.
Oh yeah.
Bloody hell. You'll get yourself told off in a minute.
You of all people. Kettle and black. I don't know.
Me of all people.
Yes. Pot and kettle and black.
Hey, I tell you what, I'm a true gentleman, right? I don't. Yeah, okay, right. We are being recorded. It is going out now, so we're gonna get straight down to the undies, and that's what we're doing. I wanna share an image up on the screen straight away, but just probably make a couple of announcements. Your caravan looks wonderful there. Oh God, I've forgotten your name. Andrea, it looks wonderful.
Yeah.
You've got the beautiful light behind you. Now, what do we know about the Newport ship? It's my first experience with the Newport ship is along the lines that I was directing an archaeological excavation at the time near St. Bride's, and there was something in the news, on the news, I would say, and it said there was these pictures of a beautiful vessel that was coming out of the muds near Newport, and it was it was a June day, 2002, and I can remember my volunteers went to see the excavation, I think on the weekend, because they were excavating in the week, and they all come back on Monday really excited to say that they were actually seeing the reveal of a boat. Yes, they come back and said there was a boat being revealed besides the River Usk. Obviously, it's now known as the Newport ship. Now, whenever you're doing any research on the Newport ship, you need to put Newport medieval ship into the search bar, because if you type in Newport ship onto the internet, you probably get shipbuilding in Newport in the last century. So you've got to put in Newport medieval ship. Very big differentiation. And it was one of those great reveals that archaeologists were involved in the archaeological excavation of the Newport ship very, very early on, and it was found by complete accident. Nobody could have guesstimated that there would have been a ship along a muddy inlet, because that's what it is. When basically along the River Usk, all these little inlets off the River Usk itself. This was one that was used in the past for shipbuilding, and this is why it was there, preserved perfectly in the mud, and found on the west bank of the River Usk. And it was ironically it was found in an area where they were constructing a riverfront art centre. Now, if this had been discovered 50 years earlier, it wouldn't have been called an art centre at all. It'd be called the Riverfront Museum. And it'd be quite ironic that a ship was being found on the site of where a museum was being built. In this case, in 2002, it's a Riverfront Art Centre. However, the idea was that they were going to build a basement into the Riverfront Art Centre, a watertight basement, and then they were going to they were going to take the boat out and they're going to put it back in there. It's probably good that they didn't do that, because the timbers associated with the Newport ship are still being conserved and being researched even today. So you would have had an empty throne waiting for its ship to be seated. 20 years on, in the basement of the Riverfront Art Centre. That's not what eventually happened. They found out, obviously, it was too big to have a display area. The plans would need to be completely changed in connection with the Riverfront Art Centre, and therefore this is why it's in a storage building not too far away from Newport today, which people can actually go and see open days and so on. So I'm very wary of time today, because I want to get outside and I want to get on with stuff. And I on Tuesday, this did go on for 2 hours. So I just really need to try and curb that in today. But what we do know is that some damage was caused to the vessel in the course of discovering it, even though archaeology was involved more straight away. And there's a lot of damage caused to the vessel as well, due to other building works that had occurred, i.e. pile driving. Pile driving is a process where you where you've got very high high value equipment that basically punches holes into the surface of the soil and the mud that you want to work on, and you pour in their concrete, creating piles. And there's evidence that these piles had gone through this Newport ship probably 50, 60 years earlier, so causing some damage, but nobody knew it was there. So the official name, as we know, is the Newport ship, and it's to be used to distinguish it from other historical vessels. To get something political out of the way, so we can just get this off my chest straight away. If this was found in England, it would have been displayed alongside the HMS Victory and in with the Mary Rose. It would have had its own. People would be able to see it from all around the world by now, in its own museum, because naturally it was found in Wales. We usually don't give a stuff, but it's good that the thing was saved, because there was a public outcry. It was going to just be they were just going to backfill in there, and they were just going to leave it, and it was just going to rot, and that was going to be it. But there was a public outcry, and they saved most of it, because I think the prow is still in the muds there. I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, I think there was this thing, we're going to leave the prow and the stern in there, and I think they managed to get the stern out, and I don't know. Anyway, the long story short is that there was a public outcry, and they decided to save the majority of the vessel. And however, the one thing is, again, that political thing that I usually do each week about how badly our archaeology and history is actually treated in our land of Cymru, Wales, is that I can remember when the Mary Rose was revealed, that you could more or less go and see it straight away. Well, this hasn't been put back together for anybody to see in any way, shape, or form in the past 20 years. It's in bits. The ribs, the ribs and the keel are still to be seen, not put together, and to get a true idea of the beam, the width of the vessel, and from the prow and the aft, as the vessel all pinned back together again, hasn't been done since, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, that's my political bandering going on about. This is a reconstruction of the this wonderful vessel. I will have a little bit of a discussion about this now. You've got I got the two castles on the prow and the aft, and you've got the castle, the two typical medieval looking vessels, and this is at the stage where rigging is being developed. Usually what you think about these vessels is that it's when you look at these vessels, what you usually see is, before this stage, is just basically ropes to just climb up. So the development in this image of a vessel that's starting to look more modern, when I say Victorian, is just basically a revolution. This is a revolutionary vessel. You know, they always say that this vessel itself is not as important as the Mary Rose, but you know, this paves the way for the Mary Rose. The Mary Rose, you're looking at it on basically on its maiden voyage, it sinks. Well, this vessel's out at sea for about 20 years. So if we look at the prow and we look at the aft, and we look principally at the two castles, these would be described as castles, is purely a merchantman. And actually, most ships were merchantmen. The idea of having a battling vessel with cannons daubed all over it is an enigma at this stage, because you know the fighting vessel. You had pirate vessels in the Mediterranean, you had pirate vessels here and there, but they were usually converted merchantmen. The idea of actually building a set destroyer class vessel back in the 1400s is something that was probably really not heard of. And most of the vessels in regards to the English and the Spanish Armada were actually merchantmen. They were actually converted vessels. There were only a small number of men of wars in regards to the Spanish 1588 and 1589 English Armada fleets, or armadas. Yes. So there were very few of those vessels that were actually set built as fighting craft. They were usually mainly all converted merchantmen. And actually, the point of view when we look at when the Mary Rose sank in 1546, I think that date's right. When the Mary Rose sank, that was a vessel that had the potent. That's a good word. The potent to be a vessel that could fight out at sea. But when I say use the word potent, it really didn't work, because they really didn't know how to build a man of war back in the 1540s of that scale with all the cannons. They had no idea what cannons did out at sea, and really how to fire them. So back to that, trying to really put across that what we do have is merchantmen. Is merchantmen themselves that are for that real purpose. Most of the vessels out at sea were merchantmen back when this vessel was out at sea in the 1400s. We do have some really good dates for this vessel. 1449 when it was built. Sometime 20 odd years later, this vessel was mothballed, and it was mothballed in a way that allowed archaeologists to reveal the great reveal of the archaeology that was seen on display in 2002. Right. So what I'm now going to go on to this sort of pro bias that this is a massively important vessel to understanding trade. One of the biggest problems that we do have in this land, particularly this side of the borders, trying to understand trade, we're always portrayed throughout the years as a backwards country with no trade aspects, with no ability to sort of send our goods anywhere except for a few bushels of barley and a few staple crops of wool that are going out of Cardiff. This is what we're seeing in the 1400s. But what we see is that we've got a massive trade connection in Wales, Cymru. We've got a massive trade connection with Ireland, with Portugal, with Spain, with France. What we do see is lots of goods from the continent coming into our country. And only our country, Wales, Cymru. We've got lots of goods coming into this country, and we see that through the sense of maritime trade. May I say the obvious? You can't get to Britain other than via boat. So if you're going to find goods from France, Sartonia ware from France, from about the 1300s in Wales, there's only one way it's going to get here. It's not going to get via England, because it's got to get via England via boat anyway, ship. So what we are saying is that we do see the aspect of the very, very importance, the massive stentorial importance of shipping trade into our land, and it's one thing that's very much missed, and it's one thing that actually Jessica's doing lots of research in as well. I'm looking at this image and I'm thinking this is really good, but what we do see is that on the port to starboard side, the port side, we see from the keel for the ribbon from the keel through to the ribbon to go to the height of the beam. It doesn't actually go to the height of the beam on the port side, but on the starboard side we do see that, and we'll explain why that is. We'll explain why that is with another image. What we can see on this reconstructed image is a wonderful image of Newport Castle. And one thing about Newport Castle is one of those, again, Newport is full of those secrets of Wales that nobody ever wants to go to, because I really don't like Newport at all. But it does have a really nice set. It does really have a nice set of medieval remains in regards to a keep and a port gate. A port gate is basically that you would access river supplies if the castle was being placed under siege via the River Usk. There was a wall around Newport once, but all that wall's gone. And may I make a little bit of a diatribe as well. Most walls around towns and cities in South Wales are gone. Caerphilly, we might see the castle, but there was a wall around the town of Caerphilly, gone. Newport, there's a wall around Newport, gone. All we got is bits of castle. The wall around Cardiff, other than about 0.5% of the wall around the old city of Cardiff is now gone. Cowbridge, we do have a nice set of wall around Cowbridge. It's still there. We are told that there was a wall around the town of Lansford Major once. Oh, I let that one slip, didn't I? Anyway, but the fact of the matter is, we're seeing a nice little bit of a reconstruction there with a nice setting the scene. What we are setting the scene is headline news. So what we got the port side in the top part, and we've got the starboard side in the lower part. Now that looks really distorted, doesn't it? It looks very, very distorted. So what we're going to do, we're going to chuck in where the keel is. Right, and we're just going to get the little bit of drawing in there. And you know, I need to shut my mouth now and actually go on to my notes because I've gone off on one. Which is what you guys pay for. So this is actually the port side, right? And this is the starboard side. Now I need to explain something before anyone jumps and says this doesn't look right. Right. So there is our keel. Right. So what we've got is when the vessel was put into harbourage, it was put into a wet dry dock, if you know what I mean. Basically, it was supported by a cradle in a wet dock. And it was supported by a cradle so they could work on it in dry conditions and whatever, right? And what happened? The cradle collapsed into the mud. And what that did was the starboard side collapsed. So we've got a massive series of starboard side actually surviving. And actually, if you flattened out the port side, it would probably come out to about here, right? So you know we've got. And get my details in here. You can tell I'm flowing. 2.7 meters in height from the keel up to trying to attempt to get to the beam, the side of the beam. The beam is the center of the vessel from the starboard to port side, right? So you get to the edge of the beam there. So this is what we're actually seeing here. And those are those damnable piles. You can see those piles sticking out. They're not miniature trees or timbers, these. What they are is basically they are piles, concrete piles that have been driven into the mud, right? You can see the damage that's been done, right? But what we can see is a lot more information. So if we change my little bit of an image there and we chuck that out there and we sort of work out what we're doing, you can see some of the nice ribs here. This is the base. This would have held a mast, like the central mast. And interesting enough, you got a damnable pile going straight through the middle of it. How does that happen? A wonderful piece of archaeological detail, and you've got a pile going straight through where the mast would have been. What is the case of irony that we've got with that? Anyway, what we've also got is we've got the external planking and we've got the internal planking. And then we've got little bits of evidence on this side of some of the decking, right? And if it's got decking, what's it referred to as? A ship, right? Oh, shut up, Goff. You're going to say there's a little boat carried on you and all sorts. But anyway, we'll carry on with that. But yes, what I want to do now is I just want to clear that. And this was the image that was the hang on a minute. This was the image that we would have seen in the newspapers back in the day. It became big news. It became big news in 2002. June 2002. And again, I've always felt a bit of reluctance talking about this vessel because I've got a little bit of anger about something else as well. The archaeological organization that was responsible for excavating this vessel, which I've never got on well with, the Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, they had tens of thousands of visitors visiting the vessel, and then they started turning around and saying, "Oh, we don't have any money to lift this thing and to sort of display it." And then I found out that members of the public weren't being charged to see this vessel, and they could have probably raised hundreds of thousands of pounds in a week by people viewing it. That was the lack of foresight, and obviously archaeologists have got to go to the public first begging for money to preserve it. That's what probably made me really angry at the time. Archaeologists are not really good at getting money out of people, most of them. The ship was originally around 35 meters from prow to aft length, and has been estimated to have had a burden tonnage. What a burden tonnage is like a containing put tonnage. That's what would have gone on it. That's what you could have stored on it. That being the number of tons of Bordeaux wine that could have stowed in its hold. So basically, it could have carried 161 tons of Bordeaux wine, which is enough to get Gough drunk for the next 10 years. I'm sure he'd run out after that because he's got a lot of mates he'd share it with, particularly that one called Alan. Anyway, vessels of this type were considerably large for the day, right? So 35 meters length of the vessel was seen to be quite a large vessel. Today we can get haven't the United States got an aircraft carrier which is 1,000 meters long? So this little thing would be like a minnow compared to that aircraft carrier, but back in the day it was something. It was referred to as a great ship by contemporary standards. Right. So having a vessel which was 40 meters long would be massive. 35 meters long was classed as a great ship, right? And actually, when we think about the beam, the width of the vessel, I think we're talking about 8.2 meters in width. That's quite a considerable beam. That's quite wide actually, and it would have been quite balanced. It would have been balanced fairly well. And the reason why I'm saying it would have been balanced fairly well, is it would have been on long journeys, and it would have needed a suitable hold to carry that burden of Bordeaux wine or whatever it was carrying, right? And coming into harbour, we'd have had the Bordeaux wine, and we'd have had some really nice barrels and all that type of stuff. We know it carried barrels of what are we talking about? Barrels of brandy or something. Anyway, it was barrels of wine. I don't know when brandy come in, but anyway, the point is we know it's carrying barrels of spirits, and the point is that it would have sailed all the way over to Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, and it would have gone over to France. So that would have meant the Bay of Biscay. Now, we've already had discussions about the Bay of Biscay. We're not going to go back to the Bay of Biscay. I remember there was Ellen and Gough at loggerheads about sailing across the Bay of Biscay. It was a good thing to do in Ellen's eyes, and me and Gough was saying, no, it's not. But anyway, the point is this may have been able to cope with the Bay of Biscay sailing across it, but I would have gone along with a coast hugger anyway. So it was able to deal with open water, but it would have probably coast hugged around the Bay of Biscay within all the harbourage through to France, into the Iberian Peninsula, and that way around as well. This is the way trade moved around back then. It wasn't like the great bloody, what you'd do in China. You would put 1,000 of these great massive containers on a container ship, and you just sail it to Britain and expect us to be able to unload it in an hour. Back then, the way shipping worked was a bit like somebody going shopping today down an old-fashioned high street. What you might do, you might buy something in Greg's, and you might go to the Principality Building Society, you might go to the post office, you might go to the pub in Goff's case, and you'd be spending money all the way along the way. Well, the difference back then would be very similar, but what you would do, you'd be trading your goods. So say for example, from San Sebastian in Spain, what you would be doing, which was a great harbour. We think this vessel may have been constructed San Sebastian in Spain. What would have happened is that you would have had you'd have had barrels and barrels of maybe oils from Spain, and maybe some Spanish wine, and maybe some pottery, and maybe some dates, maybe some other bits and pieces, right? And maybe some cork. Yes, cork as well. Cork. We've got evidence of cork involved in this vessel as well, which is not actually in my notes anywhere, but yeah, I can remember that anyway. Anyway, so what you do, you trade all that into France, right? And when you get to, say, Bordeaux, you might sail into Bordeaux itself. You might get some Bordeaux wines, and what you do, you trade off some of the other goods that you've got on there, and then you would actually trade over. You might actually sail. You might sail back a long bit more of the coast, and then you'd go over to Southampton. Southampton might actually it takes some of the Bordeaux wine off, and it might actually, I don't know, look what we're going to talk about. We're going to sort of put on some barley, right? So by the time it gets to Wales now, and you might have some tin coming on from Cornwall. So the tin itself would then go to Harbridge in, say, the likes of Swansea, and then the tin would go off to be worked in, mixed with the copper and so on, in regards to Swansea, and then it would then end up in Newport, and then, amazingly enough, the last goods to be taken on board and exchange would be wool from Wales, and then it would go over to Bristol, be completely unloaded in Bristol, right? And very fast workers in Bristol, and then it would be stocked full again, and whatever was going on with it, and probably from Bristol they were probably filling it with iron. Because when we think about Charterhouse in the likes of Somerset, we got lots of sort of not iron, lead. I don't know where I got my iron from. They probably putting on board lead ingots, and maybe actually iron as well from the likes of the Forest of Dean. So all that stuff would have been going on at Bristol, and then it would have traded back through, and this would have been the trade. This would have been the trade back then. Sort of long distance trade. Do you know, I've gone off on a right tangent. It's good when I go off on a right tangent, talking relevance, but putting more into it. Do you know what? We got another little bit more of a sleeker design, Carvel design, sleeker design of this vessel there. There's a couple of the boys on there. Burn that English flag. But then again, Wales was part of England back then, because England had lost his war, and now this is why the flag of the English king is going to be flown on the aft of the vessel, if it was flown. And can you notice there that the rigging is rather different? We don't have the same rigging as on the other reconstruction. So we're bit of a debate there, but a bit more of a debate. And you know what? That wooden bridge, that bridge must have had a drawbridge on it, simply because navigable goods would have been going up the River Usk still. So that wooden bridge, I'd like to see a bit of a reconstruction with a bit of a raised bridge on that. So anyway, cracking on with my notes, cracking on. As the man said, crack the whip. So Dendro, now what we do find, just chuck a little bit in there. We've got a little bit more dating stuff than the dendrochronology. But what we do know, and I tell you what, we went off on a massive debate on Tuesday with this next point, right? And let's bring us into it, boys and girls, right? So dendrochronology, tree ring dating. So one thing that we do find is that they had to get tree ring dates from the keel and the ribs, simply because it had been refitted a number of times So if you get dates from the other timber, it would actually give you a later date from when the vessel was actually constructed. We do feel that from all the dendrochronology dates and a coin that dates from 1447, but we're not going to do that yet. We're talking about the dendrochronology. The dendrochronology dates themselves assist us in telling us that the trees were felled in 1449, right? And they weren't cured, right? They were probably used straight away. They were used green. Now we had this little bit of a debate, and there's a chap who's in one of my classes in my Arnside class. There's several individuals that have either been to sea or have worked on vessels, and the overall thing would have been that the timbers would have been green. And I said, well, this is one thing I don't really understand, because having green timbers would mean that they would surely warp. And I say, actually, green timbers are best to use for vessels like this. This is what we're talking about. And the other thing as well is the other big thing about this is that the timbers would have had to have been used straight away, because you can't stockpile these timbers in the port of San Sebastian and expect nobody's going to go away with them and actually build other ships. Back in the day, when you fell a tree, you need to use it straight away. If you got to. So when you see basically the ribs of a building like this are the reverse of crux frame building construction. Crux frame building construction is when you get a tree and you halve it, and that creates the two sides of the crux. Right, and you'd put a beam in between it, and that would secure it, and that would create one bay, and then so that would be the one end of the building. And if that's a one gable end, it's only a one. It's only got two gate. It's only got one bay. Right, the space between one crux and another crux is called a bay. So if you just got a very close gable, just in one bay, a very small building, you're going to need two trees, which are halved to create four sets of timbers. So in other words, if you reverse that, you can get an idea that that's basically the same as these ships were actually constructed. And very interestingly enough, if you actually go to somewhere like, let me get the word in you, Margam. If you go to Margam, I can remember one of the things when we used to go to Margam is that there are trees at Margam that are very, very queer, right? So they're growing up and then they go down either side. And basically they've been weighted down to actually create ribs for a vessel, right? Clearly ribs for Her Majesty's Navy. Unfortunately, we haven't been building timber vessels like that for 150 years, so it's unlikely that those timbers have been created for that purpose, but it just gave me a good idea when I was a child. Anyway, so this vessel itself, so we know that the vessel was constructed in 1449. We can probably work out within a few weeks when the vessel was constructed by the amount of bark that's on the vessel, the timber, if there's any bark or whatever. But anyway, the point is that we can get a good idea when the vessel was constructed. And interesting enough, we've got mainly oak, but the keel is actually made out of a different material. Okay, it's made of beech. So most of the vessels made of oak, but the keel is actually made of beech, and probably because beech actually grows. If you've ever seen beech trees, right, you can get a long straight piece of wood, right? A long, timber, because wood is what you collect in woods to put on your fire. Timber, a long piece of timber, sort of very long. This is what you can get with beech. Unfortunately, you can't really get the same effect with oak in lots of instances. Two main types of oak, right, in Britain: the perpendicular oak and the sisal oak, right? And the two quercuses that we've got in this country. And the sisal grows straight, right, and the pedunculate doesn't. Interesting enough, the Welsh oak grows predominantly in England, and the English oak grows predominantly in Wales. Don't ask how that works out. Anyway, so we've gone completely off on a tangent there. So anyway, what we're talking about the ship being thus constructed in 1449 in or very close to the Spanish Iberian port in the Basque country of northern Spain. in San Sebastian in 1449, which the Basque region was massively known as a mecca for shipbuilding. I shouldn't really use the word mecca because it wasn't many years earlier. Well, actually, at this time, the Moors were still being kicked out of Spain. So I didn't mean that as a pun, but obviously this is a place of shipbuilding, the Basque country of northern Spain. Ooh. And there's another point to be made there. One key point. I'm sorry. I'm just my mind is just floating on so many different levels today. And well, if we do have a break, I'm unlikely I'm going to be able to get back to this state. But the fact of the matter is, one reason why good old Queen Liz I in her English Armada in 1589 wanted to head for the Basque region was because it was an important location of the shipbuilding industry. But as we know, Queen Elizabeth's Armada was completely annihilated in response to the Spanish Armada being very damaged the year previous. So that's why Queen Liz is there in 1589. So obviously that is 140 odd years later. So timbers associated with the later phases of repair come from where? Britain. So what we know is that the main principal location, and maybe the person who owned it was the Earl of Warwick, who was actually the kingmaker, right? The Earl of Warwick probably owned it in the 1450s, 1460s. And remember, the ship's only really at sea for under about 20 years, right? Because we know by 1466, it's got a major refit, right? And by about 1470, it's off the waves, right? So this is the point, okay? So this is the point to occur. We see the vessel is only at sea for 20 years. But then again, are you going to have a wooden vessel like this at sea for a very, very long time? Right. So 20 years for a vessel that's been banding across the Bay of Biscay and coastal hugging and all the rest of it. 20 years is probably about a good innings, right? And even if you look at some of the fighting ships of the Armada of Nelson from 1805, the Battle of Trafalgar, most of them weren't massively old anyway. So what we do, we have some major structural changes occurring in 1466. And those major structural changes were probably occurring in the exact location it was eventually found. It went out to sea for a couple of years, and then it rebirthed in there, and then a disaster and calamity hit the vessel, which we're going to go on to. So what we've got is that then we've got a major renovation, probably 1468, the next major renovation, and basically this is where the vessel foundered. And we know that the vessel just didn't go in there, just sort of sailing in this little inlet, and it just got caught and they couldn't get out again. The vessel was actually found on an oaken cradle. And I do actually believe they found some elm wood as well. So we've got a cradle which actually supported the vessel. And the cradle collapsed, and so did the vessel on the starboard side. Not good. It was berthed there for repair, and it was just basically abandoned. The supports gave way on the starboard side, and it just opened up like a melon, being hit by a baseball bat. Nice description. Many artifacts in the ship, such as coins, pottery, and plant remnants, would have been found on the collapsed side, the starboard side, which basically was inundated with mud and lost forever. Because the Usk, as we know, rises and falls quite considerably. It's quite a rise and fall river, really, the Usk, and it's and you can imagine that by the time you get to under 150 years later, when we look at the Great Tsunami of 1606, that any bits of the vessel that may have been sticking out the mud that hadn't been salvaged were completely covered in a big thick pile of muddy crap, so it had been lost forever. Although there were no initial plans to preserve the ship in its entirety, there we go. It wasn't going to be saved. This vessel, which should have been saved from the nation, wasn't going to be saved. Right? This is the point. And by the way, I've spat all over my computer, so I can't really use the mouse a minute. Do you know what? They used to have a teacher in school called Soapy Luxton, right? We won't talk about him. Anyway, so we got this very famous image, and what you can see there is you can clearly see you've got they've been driven directly into the vessel as well. So I think we disconnected the vessel was connected from the power on the aft, and they had to recover. I can't remember. I can't really remember what bits of it they did actually completely cover, or whether anything's still there today. But what we are going to do is go back to my notes, and I'm going to have to find some tissue. I've never ever complained. I've never ever used the excuse that I've spat all over my little mouse on my laptop and I can't really operate things. That's a new excuse. I could use that more often. Right. Oh, that's working good. My little thing's working now. So what initial estimates to preserve the vessel were seen to be somewhere in a region of £3.5 million to preserve it in its sort of in its entirety, to lift it. £3.5 million. But obviously the figure's gone way up since then. This was 2002 when conservators would work for a little bit less than they'd work for today. So the money has actually been raised through public subscription, and obviously through the Welsh Assembly Government and Newport City Council and other areas. And there's a dedicated industrial unit, which the local council describes as now the biggest wood conservation centre in the UK. Thousands of bits of wood, where preservation and research continue. There is one thing that could be said for this long-ending research of the vessel. And what could be said there is if they'd rushed to conserve it and put it on display with lots of the information which we could have learned about the vessel, we wouldn't have learned. So they haven't just been sitting in boxes and nobody's been researching them. They have been researching them, which is one of the positives over this long period of time. It was never going to go in the arts centre. It was never ever going to happen. So what I want us to do now is sort of change the image, because I've just been banding on and talking it too much. We got this little bit of a reconstruction. It's not the best reconstruction in the world because it's a bit blurred, but there is where our Newport ship is. Hang on a minute, let's get my little doodads on you. There's nothing wrong with your little doodah. Right, there's where it was housed, right? And there's where the wall would have been around the city. And there's where the wonderful, can't really call it a city, can I? Because it's a town. But back then anyway, so there's where the castle is, and there's where the bridge is. And I'm sorry to say the person who reconstructed this one forgot that you need to get the mast through there. So it must have been a raised bridge in the central section. But there you can see our vessel, and it's dominating that little inlet, a natural little inlet. And there's one interesting fact that wonderful Jessica dug up, is that they actually found a body in the mud underneath the vessel that predated the vessel. I think they predated the vessel by some hundreds and hundreds of years. A set of human remains. I think it dated to before the birth of Christ, the set of human remains. I can't remember the exact date. I really apologize for that. But it predated the vessel by well over 1,000 years. I think the date was 1,600 years. So the vessel was placed there sometime in about 68. So we got human remains. So we know the inlet has been there for a very, very long time, a muddy inlet, and used for a very, very long time until this vessel was birthed in there. And then we get the history of the Newport ship. So obviously, the way things have sort of occurred is that over the years, bits of the hang on a minute, let me get a little bit of an annotation, do that effort in you. Bits of, so what we've got here is that all this has been reclaimed. So in other words, all of this here has retained and preserved any of the archaeology, and in particular down in our little bit of an area where the vessel was birthed. And this is very, very important to remember, that we've got that we've got this preserved, and the conditions of preservation here are absolutely astounding. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to look at my little messages here. Yes, we did say the San Sebastian thing. HMS Victory was 45 years old before Trafalgar. I do see your point, Henry, but that's pretty old for a fighting class vessel, particularly HMS Victory. That's not a long period of time, is it? 45 years. Gough has had his car for over 45 years. What's wrong with you? And there we go. Thank you for that, Henry. The body dated directly to 180 years BC. What did I say? 1,600 years before the vessel. That was a couple of years out. So anyway, thank you for that. Wonderful, Henri. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. Sort of clear that little bit of a screen so we can sort of get a little bit more doings on this. And where are we? Good. Right. Excellent. So what I'd like to probably talk about now is like to look at the loss of the vessel and why it ended up where it's ended up on that little image there. And yes, so the River Usk has a large tidal range, and it appears that the vessel was deballasted and carefully floated into a side channel. There we go. On a very high tide, and then situated on a pre-erected cradle made of oak and elm logs, as we've already mentioned. The ship appears to have been undergoing a major refit, as it had been evidenced as being refitted sometime in 1466. However, before this repair work could be completed, the cradle appears on the starboard side to have collapsed. The ship heeled over onto its starboard side, and the subsequent incoming tides appeared to have flooded the vessel. Flooded the vessel, probably floated it on its starboard side slightly floated on a port side for its port side to settle upright, and the starboard side completely collapsed, with silt and water filling up the vessel quite rapidly and removing and containing all the artifacts that hadn't been removed before and subsequently. However, efforts were made to drain, pump out, and right the ship, but this all failed. It was beyond. And when these failed attempts turned to salvage, the accessible timbers above the muds were reused, and including the iron. Along with removing larger items such as anchors, guns, and rigging, and statues of Lloyd George, the salvaging of the vessel involved hacking at the upper the upper works with axes and removing substantial amounts of the lapstrake planking, framing, and internal timbers. However, everything below the muds, below that 2.7 meter level in regards to the port side, was more or less all left intact. The salvage material would have been readily reusable in other ships and buildings. During the salvage work, numerous disarticulated timbers were just basically chucked back into the vessel and not used. And then eventually the vessel was lost forever. We don't have a name for the vessel, right? But strangely enough, we do believe we know who owned it, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker. Remember, this was the period of the Wars of the Roses, right? The Wars of the Roses that started basically in 1399 with the murder of Richard II. And the Wars of the Roses ended nicely, not in 1485, but in 1487, when the last legitimate or illegitimate claim was made on the crown. But good old Henry of Bosworth, defeating Richard III, came over that. But he obviously, the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, with the last claim in 1487. So the excellent condition of the ship's timbers may possibly be due to the low oxygen levels, the anaerobic conditions. And basically what happens is that you've got the flooding of the vessel, and these would have been ocean-bearing timbers, which didn't have much evidence of any shipworm, so they were quite sturdy. So when that was all flooded and caked in mud, over many of the floodings and the mud-bearing River Usk, that would have compacted, which meant that there would have been low to zero oxygen levels in the mud, which would have inhibited any little wood boring creatures from actually making their way, eating away at the now decaying wood. As we've already said, the port side, 2.7 meters above the keel. But fortuitously, what we do see, we see that that preserves the correct shape of the hull, where the starboard side doesn't, because it's really distorted and it's collapsed and all the rest of it, which preserved to almost its full height. So in other words, when it collapsed, if we go back to that and sort of refresh that image, I did actually say that earlier on, but if we go back to that image, where, as we said, where if we sort of zoom in there, so we've more or less got to the full height of the decking. If you squeeze this back in, so starboard side, that goes to more or less the height of the decking. So if we squeeze this back in a little bit to sort of pinch this in, as I've already said, this is where the ribs would have originally come up, but this is where it's collapsed to. So you can get a full length, a full sense of the beam. Let's use the nautical term, the full sense of the beam from the port side to the starboard side. Oh God. Anyway, I've had this bloody cough for weeks. Right. Okay. Anyway, so obviously we got some distorting, but we got nice evidence of the sort of planking. So we know about the ship's dimensions. We know 35 meters in length, the beam being 8.2, the width. We know about the tons burden where it carried of the wine. That was a standard measurement. You would measure a vessel on its burden using Bordeaux wine. It wouldn't have been, so it'd been casks of Bordeaux wine. So 161 tons burden of Bordeaux wine. I don't know how much. Yeah, you can do the research on this, right, Henry? How many barrels of Bordeaux wine constitute a ton? Okay, we need that. We need that before we have our break. Goff should actually know that because he's into his Bordeaux wine. I know he is. I can see him with his Bordeaux wine and his Madeira cake, chomping away, drinking away with his good old mate Alan's. Anyway, so that I need that answer. You've got 10 minutes. In the 1460s, customs accounts of nearby Bristol, vessels of 150 plus tons were typically called the navvy ships or great ships. And used primarily, obviously, navvies, that comes into the coal trade later on, and used primarily for the long distance voyages to southern Europe, particularly Lisbon and Portugal. I just want to go into a sharp song. Goes Portugal and Spain. Hark now the drums beat. Stop. The vessel was clinker built. And if we get a little bit of a what we need to do, we don't have an image. We've got hang on a minute. What we need to do, I'm just gonna chuck in here. So if we have an image of a clinker built structure vessel, and we got a good one, so if we can get a good one up here. If I can't, right there you can see clinker built vessels where the one above overlaps the one below and overlaps all the way down to the keel. Right, so what we need to do now, we need to get back to, oh no, I'm not showing that on the screen, am I? Oh, what a stupid bugger I am. Hang on, here we go. Right, here we go. Right, so there we go. So there we got it overlapping. So what we need to do is go back to my original image, and we need to get another reconstructed drawing on there, and we can see that clearly on there, can't we, where it's overlapping from above. A bit more cruder on that one, but nevertheless you can get a good idea what's going on. It's all for the good of the country, you know what we keep saying. The vessel was clinker built with each plank overlapping the one below, and I don't know if any of you have done oh god, this stuff I'm using on my sheds, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, you know what I mean. So this overlaps the plank below. The planks of the altar hull were positioned first, and on the Newport ship are secured to each other with iron nails driven through the overlap from the outside and then filled with iron rove plates. Basically, a rove plate is to fasten the nail in as it's folded over on the internal side of the vessel. Usually, you might put a bit of lead on there. You might put a bit of pitch on there. Oh, here we go. It's got it on there anyway. The end of each nail was then hammered flat against the rove to produce a tight seal. Gaps along the overlap were secured by tar, caulking. Caulking is a process where you'd actually fill something in with tar, and you might fill it in with, if you might fill it with lead, but maybe not tar. Animal hair and all those gubbins. Hair from horse, cow, sheep, and goat have been identified on the Newport ship, which is great. The frames ribs of the ship were then filled inside the hull and secured to the planks. Each framing piece was secured to the keel, the spine of the ship, by having its keel cut out, placed over the keel, and held by precision of fit. So this is quite a momentous time. Nails have not been used in this ship to secure frames to the keel. Right, so basically what we're using is dowels. The keel is made of beech. I told you that the keel was actually made of beech, and the ribs were actually made of oak. The keel is made of beech. And I'm actually arguing that it was actually made of beech because it was straight. The author of this argues that it was made of beech because they lacked timber. And I'm thinking you can't have lacked timber because you're able to, with the rest of the vessel made of oak. Anyway, I'm not going to go with the shortage of oak theory. I'm going to go with the fact that beech is a lot more workable. It's a little bit more softer than oak anyway, but it's going to be a bit more pliable and a bit more straighter than the oak could ever be. And we've got evidence of woodworking evidence on the vessel anyway, with marks of axes and adzes, which is a bit like a mattock, but without the pointy bit, with saw marks found on only a few timbers. So they're using axes and adzes, and using a saw on uncured timber, green timber being freshly used, is pointless, because you're going to have a warping aspect, and it's going to be more difficult to cut into the moistened wood than dry wood. So you're going to be able to use axes and adzes a lot more easily on green wood than you are going to be using a saw. Oh, here we go. Here's a little bit of data, right? I think Henry managed to get this evidence about. So here we go. Not sure this is right, but 2.7 barrels, each holding 225 liters in a barrel. So in other words, if we're talking about 151 tons, that's going to be roughly 360 to 70 odd barrels on board the vessel. Does that sound about right? I think it does. There's my quick maths. Oh, and we've got a phone call coming in. Is this from Jess to update me about the class? So we're not going to take a real break there. We're just going to answer this. Hello, Jess. Jessica says hello from the Landsworth Major class. Yeah, carry on. Any news? Yeah, everyone but Andrea. But I've got Andrea myself. And Andrea gives her love, and she sat in her caravan doing her thing. And I've got Henry and Goff, and what we're doing at this minute, we're talking about the softwood, and we're talking about the green wood being easily more worked with axes and adzes. That's why we're not using saws on it, and that's why we're not really seeing saw marks on the Newport vessel. So, anything else you want to add? Oh, and basically, as everybody's listening, my end as well. And I don't think any of this affects any of my guys, but tell everybody who's actually on the trip to Chichester that the next installment of their money is now due. And also, what I'm going to mention in front of my gang is that we will be having a pre-recorded class for the Christmas week, which is going to be the 23rd. And I will be doing a one online class for everybody the following week. Then we're back to normal on the 5th of January. So everybody's hearing this. So if you can let everyone know, and this has worked out perfectly because I'm able to make the announcements and talk to you. We were just coming to the end of my little session this morning anyway, but we were gonna have a little bit of a debate. And also wonderful Henry has worked out possibly that you can get about 2.7 barrels to a ton if you equate that to your Bordeaux wine. So we've probably worked out that there's approximately 360, 70 odd barrels of Bordeaux wine, and an average burden of a vessel is 151 tons. So as you can tell, I'm in full flow. So if anyone got any questions before you go? Give my love to everybody, and tell Steve we're looking forward to seeing him on Wednesday. If you haven't got any news, I'm going to let you go and speak to you later. Give my love to everybody, especially Kathy, okay? Because we do love our Kathy, and also Goff gives his love particularly to Kathy as well, because we do love her, and he loves everybody else, but we don't want to make it too personal. Okay, I'll speak to you then. Bye. See you. Okay, hopefully everybody got those announcements, and it was probably about the right time that Jessica called, so that was good. So I'm just going to mention now, so we've got this softwood, we've got marks of axes and adzes, and the inner hull of the ship, the large long planks that give the ship its longitudinal length. We've got some of those stringers sort of still intact. So we've got some of those long planks to give some longitudinal strength in the vessel, providing a strong, smooth inner surface, which probably supported the vanished cargo deck. So obviously we're not going to really expect that, are we, folks? And what we've got the dowels. We've got dowels being used, which are actually called trenails, dowels being used in lots of the internal works of the vessel as well. Can I just go on a bit of a diatribe, folks? One of the things that I did on Tuesday, one of the things that I had intercourse with on Tuesday, was that I basically said, if this is a developing vessel, are they actually using the rigging that is actually starting to develop at this stage? A big question. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. What we're actually seeing is the development of the prow and the aft of the vessels with the smoother in regards to the castles on either side of the vessel. Also, what we're seeing is the use of dowels, which would have always been used, and the use of iron nails, which have always been used. But later on, what we are seeing is the development of the use of copper, a lot more on vessels, because what we're also seeing, this is also the stage, folks, that artillery is starting to be used. They would have had one or two cannon on board, right? I'm not really knowing what to do with it. I'm sure if you fired a cannon on one of these vessels, it would have probably recoiled and would have sank the vessel anyway. But what we are seeing is that if you've got a lot of iron around the decking in regards to nails and stuff, all you need is somebody with hobnail boots to strike across some of these nails, to put charge to gunpowder, to blow the whole vessel up. So eventually what we are seeing is the reduction, probably with the introduction of cannon and gunpowder, with the reduction of iron being used on a vessel, and more going for copper being used for most uses on a vessel. I'm sure somebody would have found that out quite quickly. We actually have found evidence of shoes on the vessel. Somebody said, oh, well, sailors are used to not wearing shoes on a vessel. Have you ever been on a vessel and a splinter sticking up and suddenly you get that one in one of your feet, right? Causing you to go to the surgeon, then you get gangrene, your leg being cut off. I'm sorry, you would have worn shoes, right? We've got evidence of shoes being used. And if hobnails were being used on a vessel with other iron, that would have struck and you would have had a massive calamity. So obviously hobnails are going to be going out of the window now at this stage as well. So obviously this thing that I've mentioned about making the vessel directly directly available for I've actually got something thrown up on the screen here which is quite interesting, which I'm gonna mention here. The vessel itself, which is being conserved and looked at and researched, has offered the archaeologists more time to clean them up more thoroughly, discovering deliberately scribed marks into the timber, which may have actually been carpentry marks. As we get with masons' marks with stone-built castles, we're going to be carpentry marks. I tell you what, when I'm actually cutting wood, I'm scribbling all sorts of stuff over it. You know, the line goes here, or that little bit goes there, or whatever, right? So carpenters would have done the same, but instead of having a leaden pencil, graphite pencil, they would have just used a blade, a dowel of some description. Oh, I love my dowel. Stop it. These appear to be either individual shipwright marks or instructions for the position of planks or fastening, and why not? Particularly in the reconstruction stage and the conservation stage of the vessel back in the day, in the 1460s. So the conservation team is hoping that a pattern will emerge as the recording process continues. And what we do have in 2007, the cleaning. The cleaning of unusual wooden objects revealed that they were barrel-top fragments, revealing merchant marks, and therefore we've got the Bordeaux barrels coming in there. Maybe there were in excess of 300 Bordeaux barrels on there, but actually that's actually nonsense for me to say that. It wouldn't have just been Bordeaux barrels of wine. It would have actually been a mixture of goods. The measurage is Bordeaux barrels to get the burden tonnage, not actually what is actually carried on the vessel at all times. Some of these may resemble known marks of merchants from the city of Bristol, but this is not proof that the marks had originated there when they were refitting, or if there was a refit in Bristol. Now, this little bit of information actually come to me, and what we're going to actually do is dating after the break. So here we go. Henry's, I'm just going to check this out here. Henry said, was the ship called the Trinity of Newport, 1461, taking goods from Bristol to Ireland? Well, probably not. And the reason why I'm saying probably not, that we still got extensive trade to the continent. And one thing that I would say, quite happily, is that this vessel itself, owned by the Earl of Warwick, would have probably had a more suitable name associated, but we don't know. But that's a good thing. It could have been called the Trinity of Newport. We don't know, right? So what I'd like to do now is, are there any questions from anybody, please?
No.
Anybody, folks? No. What about you from wonderful Goff? Anything you'd like to say?
Well, no, just to say it's a bloody shame that they haven't managed to develop like the Mary Rose and the the Jorvik Museum and the Roskilde Museum in Denmark. It's just a shame, you know. It's a disgrace, really.
It's always a disgrace, and it's always a disgrace, my friend, and it's I've got to sigh a lot of the times, and I'm thinking, well, you know, I've sort of tried to be I've tried to sort of be non-biased in saying to everybody, well, you know, there's been opportunities to study the ship a little bit more, but unfortunately, you know, it should have been on display by now, and I completely agree with you. I really do. It should have been on display by now, and it's not. It's in storage vats, and you see all the timbers disarticulated everywhere, really well preserved. But unfortunately, this is 20 years that has been lost. And with the Mary Rose, it was. I can remember seeing the hulk of the Mary Rose from the banks of the River Thames. I can remember seeing it. Everybody could see it, right? Nobody. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I really don't.
Newport Council seem to have a history of this sort of thing, because it took them, 4 years to develop the transporter bridge and repair it and get it going. And, they don't seem to be interested in that sort of historical side of the city. I don't understand.
No, they don't, exactly. And Andrea,
what led to it actually being discovered?
Say that again.
What led to actually being discovered?
What length?
What led? What way
Oh,
them?
it was by complete accident. They had to dig really deep footings. They had to deep really. They couldn't rely upon these piles. As you can from the images, you can actually see that the piles are actually quite just. They would have just been going through mud. These piles here, they were just going through mud.
What were they trying to do to make them discover it? What were they?
They needed to build a basement. They were going to have a basement. Ironically, they were going to when they were digging for the basement, then they said they wanted the ship to be in the basement.
It was a riverside development.
Yeah, it was a riverside development. They were producing an art center. It was going to be an art center.
Okay.
But this was going to be in the basement, right? They were digging for the basement, and then they found this, and they thought, "Oh, we'll stick it in the basement when the basement's built." So this led to this being discovered in the first place.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So right. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a short break today. We'll just have 5 minutes. So if everybody could have their 5-minute break, please, and then we'll just come back. The reason I just wanted to have a short break because I can get out and play. I want to play with my turkey.
Yeah.
So 5 minutes, folks.
So how are you doing then, Carl?
What's that?
How are you doing?
You're breaking up.
Okay. How's things with
Right.
you?
Oh no, how am I doing? The weather's beautiful today.
Frosty.
But the storms on the weekend were quite damaging,
Mm.
but we survived.
All right. Okay. It's
Nobody's
quite,
hurt.
quite frosty here.
Yeah, it was very frosty this morning, and it's just trying to heat this space.
Yeah.
It's warmer in the van.
Where are you then?
Eh?
Where are you if you're not in the van?
Where am I?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in mid Wales at this minute.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I'm in mid Wales, but the sun is out and everything's quite beautiful here.
Good. Good.
So this is why I wanted to crack on. So okay. Right. Okay. I'm seeing on the computer that I'm gonna have to crack on. Right. So are we ready to get going again?
Yes.
Good. I got to try and get back into my flow. Have you got an image showing on your screen now?
Yeah. Of a boat. Of the boat.
You a ship.
Okay. Ship.
You'll have the lads coming around to sort you out if you keep getting it wrong.
Same difference.
Oh, I've viewed Jimmy Savile's making a comeback. That's what it says on the bloody computer. I don't know what the hell that means. I thought he was dead.
He is,
Right. Yeah, he is dead.
Yeah.
You don't think he'd be making a comeback at this stage? Right, okay. Right, okay. Bear with me a sec. I just got to check on something. Right. Okay, folks, let's show these images. All right, now we were talking about one of the things I wanted to talk about was the dating of the ship. Now we've got a wonderful image coming up, and it's coming in the form of a coin. And this is a rather interesting coin, and this coin itself assists the dendrochronology. So the dendrochronology reveals that most of the timbers used to build the ship originate from the Basque country, northern Spain, in 1449, as we've already established. However, there was the discovery Now, this is as they were working on the wood. They didn't actually find this straight away. There was this discovery in 2006 of a French small white silver coin that's known as a petit blanc. A small white silver coin, a petit blanc. And this small white silver coin itself had been inserted into a small square cut into a keel joint, and was a major step towards giving some more firm dating. This coin itself dates to May to June 1447, and it tells us that the timbers that were used in 1449, it tells us that the vessel could not have been constructed before 1447 because the coin dates to May to July 1447. So it gives precise dating to the 1449 date of when the ship was actually constructed. So the tree trunks found under the hull and forming the support for the ship when under repair have a dendrochronology date of up to 1469. So that means that the cradle was placed there around 1469 to carry the vessel, giving a maximum lifespan to the vessel of 20 years. There is circumstantial evidence that by 1469 the ship may have belonged to and been under repair of the Earl of Warwick. As I mentioned, kingmaker in regards to whether a Lancastrian or Yorkist, may have been able to carry the throne of England throughout the War of the Roses around that time. Now, a letter of authorization dated to the 22nd of November 1469 from Warwick to a Thomas Throckmorton, Warwick's receiver of his territories in Glamorgan, authorized various payments for the making of the ship at Newport. What did this mean? Did this mean making a new ship, or was this money to repair a badly damaged vessel in the case of our Newport medieval ship? Is it referring to that vessel? But we don't have a name. Of all the places, if we only had a name, like a name could have been placed into the document and we would have had a name for it. Thanks for that little addition earlier on, Henry. Recent research has shown that Newport sometimes had some very large vessels in the late 14 and 1500s from the records that we know, and the Newport ship would have been in that category. And these, as we've already mentioned, this was the Newport ship was an additional port within the realm of the British consciousness, and Bristol being the second port of the realm at that stage. So what I'm going to do, I'm very wary that I'm actually I've got my other phone ready, but I'll just show you these images before I lose them on this computer. So there's one of the conserved timbers with the trenails sticking out. These are the trenails. These dowels sticking out. This is one of the being conserved timbers. And it's a wonderful, nice little copper object. I think this has actually got gilt on it, which is actually showing some really nice lettering from the period. And this is actually a playing piece. Obviously, the sailors would have got very bored at times, and obviously sailing between coast to coast, as it's a playing piece for probably something like a pente, which was an ancient Greek game, or maybe something like drafts. This is the vats. These are the vats. Now, this doesn't look like there's any liquid in these ones, so these look like they've been very much conserved. So these are the great vats, vast vats with the ribs and timbers and everything in them. Have
we lost him?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm back on this one. See, so unfortunately, that was the last of the images today, which is a bit of a shame because they were actually on the computer. But let's get back to it. And if I can go back to my notes, which I've actually got ready on here to do. Very, very well organized, as you can tell today. So the dating, the coin itself is a wonderful artifact to give us a sense of dating. And then what we do have is evidence of all the other items actually found on the vessel. And we'll mention a bit of project progress as well. And I will mention that the Friends of the Newport ship organised regular open days when the project may be viewed in its current state of restoration, along with exhibits. They have people dressed up in costume and wonderful open days. A nice bit of fundraising there. Visitors have the opportunity to talk to members of the ship team, the conservators, and find out about the excavation and the campaign Save the Ship through tours of the facility. Obviously, this is all to do with the Friends of the Newport ship. Generally, the ship centre is open every Friday and Saturday between Easter and the end of October, but I don't know if that's the case now. And it basically says that from on Saturdays only from spring half term until Easter, and for November and early December. So what we're going to do is we're going to mention something about the objects that have been found, giving you an idea of the history of the vessel. So during the excavation, and actually after the excavation, in all the muds and silts, because they had lots of stuff to sample and look through, there was a wide range of artifacts actually discovered, such as stone cannonballs. Stone cannonballs obviously giving you evidence of early artillery on board the vessel, to the smallest objects such as grape seeds, which would have obviously come from the Iberian Peninsula or maybe from France. And they even found a damaged hourglass, which would have obviously been very important to navigation. They found 13 single shoes. So we've got evidence that they were using shoes on board the vessel and not just wandering around barefooted, which as I said sounds a bit ridiculous. They've got 13 single shoes. They're not indicating whether they're left or right, because actually back then shoes were uni-foot. You could use them for any foot, and it's only the concept of left and right shoes is coming in a little bit later. And we've got pieces of cork, so that indicates that cork may have been part of this maritime trade, and also other Portuguese coins. So obviously belonging to Portuguese sailors, but not necessarily, because back then the silver content of continental coins was at times far greater than our own silver content, whereas there's lots of silver coins in circulation on the continent, not so many in our country. So any sailor, an English sailor for example, would have prized their coins, and to lose a coin, which would have been the equivalent of quite a day's wages, would have been quite a loss. And the seeds, cork and coins are obviously evidence of this trade with the Iberian Peninsula. And we mentioned ships wool being used as caulking, with mixing with pitch and so on. In regards to this, we've actually identified a certain type of wool from a merino sheep. And what we do find is that there's lots of research going on, and there's lots of research going on into where the ship did come from. Was it San Sebastian? After studying the ship's structural detail, believe that the ship was built by Basque shipwrights. But there's also discussion of something else, that there's a French involvement, i.e. The wonderful small French coin, which was actually found in regards to the vessel. There's French involvement in the construction of the vessel. More needs to be known. Ceramic shards associated with pottery for storage of goods on board the vessel, along with waterlogged plant remains, indicate strong trading links with Portugal, with a strong possibility that the vessel may have been sometimes Portuguese crewed, which would actually make more sense. But we don't really know. It may have been a mixture of crew. But if it came into the possession of the Earl of Warwick, it would have been naturally an English crew. Maybe it was purchased from a Portuguese earl or lord of some kind. We don't know. So what we've got red wares, and red wares associated with Portugal. Really nice sort of Iberian red ware pottery. The earthenware types of potteries, really good quality from that age. Ceramic assemblages give us a good idea We've also got evidence that they're actually cooking on board the vessel as well, because they're soot-stained cooking vessels. So the environmental samples also contained a variety of well-preserved plants. Obviously, we mentioned the grape seeds. We've also got evidence of insects which were associated with living on board the vessel, and faunal remains, floral and faunal remains. Foodstuffs included walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, pomegranate seeds, grapes, figs, and olives were found on board the vessel, along with thousands and thousands of fish and animal bones. Obviously, when you think about it, either they're working on board the vessel as they're trying to repair it, or this has just been discarded and managed to get into the bilge. We don't know. Cod bilge is basically the stagnant buildup of water on board these vessels. And without the advent of early bilge pumps, it would have had to have been brought out of the bilge well on board the vessel, and then that would have been tanked out on buckets. So we've got evidence of unusual varieties of ship, which would have been not unusual back then, such as the ling and the tusk. And obviously the more popular herring and the black spot beam, conger, flatfish, and Atlantic salmon bones were actually found associated with the fishbone assemblage. We've obviously got evidence of shellfish recovered, including oyster, whelks, mussels, and cockles. And interestingly enough, evidence of human fleas. Amazingly enough, I think that may have come from the occasional leg in the sieving, or the occasional discarded shell of the flea. But we've got evidence of dog fleas and numerous flies as well, obviously from the fly eggs, and maybe other evidence of flies on board the vessel. This may have been associated with the bilge. The bilge would have been that horrible, stagnant, horrible water that would have built up in a vessel, that in a modern vessel is just pumped out, sort of using hoses. Back then, they would have started to introduce a proper pump, where obviously this would have been bucketed with this type of vessel. We've got evidence of beetles, including the wood-boring beetles. Wood-boring beetles, which are actually Iberian wood-boring beetles, which are the first evidence of wood-boring beetles found in the United Kingdom. So they were eaten away at the vessel. So the animal bone collection primarily consisted of domesticated cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs. And archaeologists found the remains of rat bones and quantities of domestic fowl bones as well. In addition to salted or smoked meats and fish, it is likely that livestock was kept on board. Obviously, sheep for fresh milk, or maybe you would have had a cow for fresh milk, but sheep's milk is perfectly going to be okay for the diet. So probably keeping sheep on board for their milk, as evidenced by certain grant and plant remains that are suited for animal food and bedding. So as we sort of tank through to the end here, and if that phone call does come through, then I'll take a little bit of a break, stay on Zoom, and I'll come back to you and ask questions, but that's not due yet. But what we do find is the restoration project is more or less complete. Lots of timbers were actually sent to York to be conserved, and the timbers were originally immersed in large tanks of water in a series of large shallow tanks. Small fish, included domestic goldfish and sturgeon, were successfully used to predate the various marine invertebrates that were coincidentally collected when the timbers were salvaged. And then obviously there is a next stage. Once this process had been undertaken, they then started to immerse the timbers into a glycol solution, and all the cleaning had been done. And obviously what they would then need to do is to record each of the timbers to actually get a three-dimensional rotatable image of each artifact that can all be put together on a computer, recording all the little bits of detail and damage on these timbers. So conservation polyethylene glycol was used. So what you do is, after all the salts and all the horrible mollusks and everything have been taken out of the wood and eaten away, then you put the timbers into a very expensive tank of polyethylene glycol, which then replaces the water, and then sort of deals with all the horrible stuff such as nail residue on the woods and so on. So that's all sorted out. So this has taken year after year to do. The process of conserving one single piece of wood takes 18 months in these large vats. So all the woods need, and they couldn't have done them all at the same time. So in September 2016, all of the ship's timbers were completed their PEG treatment cycles. And then they needed to be freeze dried to draw out all of the residue liquids of all constituents. As of August 2019, 60% of the timbers had been freeze dried, with all the timbers I think will be probably all been returned by now. This is what it's saying. There's been lots of conferences on this, and finally today now, most current funding for the preservation of the ship comes from the Heritage Lottery Fund, with smaller contributions from the Friends, Newport City Council, and the Assembly Government for Wales providing funding. So what we're going to do, we're going to call that a day now. Are there any questions?
No.
Oh, well done. That's the first from you, Andrew. You're not saying anything. Anyway, they all passed their love on to you from the class. What about you, Goff?
No, it's very interesting. That's more information than you gave us last time. So it was great. Yeah, very good indeed. I'm interested to see how much trade was done in those days, around Europe, fantastic.
It's that trade thing. It's that trade thing, particularly with Wales. And I'm seeing this as a major port. Cardiff, we forget Cardiff as well. And we forget Swansea. I mentioned Swansea a little bit today. I mentioned Swansea once, but we forget our trade. We forget our sea trade. And we're looking to do more of that. In the research that archaeologists are doing now. What about you, Henry?
Very interesting. It's a great shame that they don't seem to be getting on to actually display anything.
This is the shame, and I would probably say that I'm going to guesstimate now, and this is going to be I'm going to guesstimate that we're not going to see it on public display until 2030.
If you're lucky.
I'm hoping, fingers crossed on that one. And I would like, which is a big shame. I would like to finally say that if anyone's interested, next Wednesday, I've got a new class starting at 6 o'clock. Jessica's class is still going, looking at medieval archaeology and history within Wales. I've got my new class looking at on interpreting the past, looking at evidence of disability, looking at evidence of how people dealt with the process of mourning, and that's what we're going to do starting next Wednesday, and that's going to be an online class at 6 o'clock. This is actually now next week is actually the week of bereavement, where people dealing with bereavement, and it's quite appropriate that we'll be looking at some of those areas in my new class next Wednesday if anyone's interested. If they are, stay beyond and have a chat. But if there are any other questions, Goff, Henry and Andrea?
No,
thank you.
Next week.
Next week, finally, next week we will be looking at, in my diary, it says a lost city, and we're going outside Britain. And I will leave that until next week as a mystery.
Right. Thank you.
We look forward to that.
If there's no other questions, Goff, Henry and Andrea, thank you very much, and bye-bye, and I will see you next week, the three of you, or if not, we'll see you then. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Goff.
Luck.
Take care, Andrea.
Good luck with your building.
Thank you very much.
I've sent you another little text there on other names.
Okay, I'll have a good look. I'll
have a good one.
Have a good one. You sent it to me on here, or you sent it via email?
No, it's on the chat.
Oh, it's not come up. So what did you say? What was it? It's actually not come up on my chat.
Hold on.
Actually, send it to me via email.
Right. Okay, we'll do.
Send it to me via email. That would be great. I'll see you next week, Henry.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Speak to you then.
Leave there.
You've done it. Thank you very, very, very much. This is Carl from wonderful Bilth Wells today, and beautiful weather out there, Bilth Wells, and I've got to help somebody with the project, and that's what I'm going to be doing. That's why I'm here. And thank you very much for watching. And if you ever get up to Bilth Wells, the sun is out. It's beautiful. Take care. Bye.